Now, as we continue to look at arrays in JavaScript, I've gone ahead and put together another array that I've declared here in this particular document. And I want to take a look at something very specific. So we've looked at how to access arrays and how to change data within arrays. But what happens if we do this? Let's say I said document write grades 11. Now this is interesting because we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 indexes. So grades 11 is outside of the actual boundaries of the array. So I wonder what's going to happen. Let me go ahead and save, and let's run this real quickly in the browser. Click preview, and we get the result undefined. Now you'll notice we didn't exit with some type of syntax error or something like that. We simply got the value undefined because there is no grades 11 defined in the array itself. So undefined can cause a problem because this actually represents a logical error that you discover at runtime versus a syntax error. If you have a syntax error, that's the type of error you can find through Firefox, and you can look in the errors panel and you can see your errors. But an error like this is a logical error, meaning the program runs but you get the wrong result. These types of errors are very difficult to find, so I highly recommend that when you create an array, you make sure that you're working within the bounds of the array. In this case, from 0 to, let me change it to 9, should give us the last index of the array, which is 91. So the next thing I want to look at is a special type of loop that you can do with arrays and other types of objects. Now, we don't cover a lot of other types of objects within this particular class, but arrays are objects. And you'll remember me saying previously, objects have both properties, like, for example, array.length, like we used in the last lecture, and they have methods. Those are things the array can do, which I'll be showing you here in a few minutes. So array is one of those objects. It's got properties and methods. And if you want to loop through an object like an array, there's an easy way to do that, and that's the for in statement. So let's say I did this, for x in grades. What this is going to do is it's going to automatically loop through the array, which is pretty neat. And I don't have to know how many members are in the array or determine that by using grades.length. You remember here, if we do document write, let's add a break, and I'll concatenate with that grades.length. Now, this length property is a property of the array object, therefore I can access it with grades. And since it's a property of the array object, I'm able to access that value. So that'll output the grades.length, the length of the array. But if I go ahead and I use a for in loop, I don't need to know the length of the array because x will continue to iterate, will continue to count while there are still members of the array. So let's say I did something like this, document write iteration. So this will tell us which iteration of the loop we're in, right? First time through will be 0, 1, 2, etc. And then we'll get the value of the position we're at in the grades array. So x will first be 0, 1, 2, all the way through the array. Let me go ahead and, that should not be a string literal. Let me go ahead and correct that, plus grades x, plus we'll put a break on the other side. All right, so now when we output this, we get, let me put a break over here too, just to neaten up the appearance a little bit. We got the right result, but I forgot one of the breaks, so the result isn't as neat as I'd like. All right, so we get our 91. That's grades position 9. And then we get 10 for the length of the array. Now, the length of the array is the number of objects in the array. It's not necessarily the number of the last index. Because remember, we start counting at 0, and we get 0, 1, 2, 3, and all the way to 9. But the length of the array is 10. So remember, the length is going to be 1 greater than the last index frequently. This is a frequent cause of confusion and errors, so make sure you don't make those errors when you're doing your own coding. Then the for in loop goes to work, and x starts counting at 0, as you can see right here, all the way to 9, and it outputs the corresponding value. So a pretty easy way to loop through arrays or just about any other object by using that loop object that for in loop that I just showed you. Now, because the array is an object, I mentioned before, it's got a number of properties and it's got a number of methods. Now, you're probably going to want to look at a JavaScript reference at some point to figure out exactly what those methods and properties are. There's an easy one that's really good for beginners and one that I like to use at w3schools.com/JSREF/ and here's where it gets complicated. JSREF, there it is, object array. I had used it previously, so it's stored. So we've got our array object properties, and we've already used length, which sets or returns the number of elements in the array. And don't worry about constructor or prototype. You won't use those unless you're a more advanced JavaScript programmer. And then we've got some object methods. And each one of these is useful for working with arrays. For example, concat, sounds like concatenate, and that's what it's short for, joins two or more arrays and returns a copy of the joined arrays. Join joins all the elements of the arrays into a string. Pop removes the last element of the array and returns that element. Push adds a new element to the end of the array and returns the new length. So let's say I wanted to use push. We'll look up how push works here. So you have array, which is going to be your name of the array, dot push, and then the elements you want to add. All right. So let's go ahead and let's add to our array here. So our array is called grades. We're going to use push, and we're going to push, and we can push one or more elements onto the array. So let's say we have to add more students. One student got 100, the next student got a 63. Now when I save, watch what happens to the length of the array over here. So those two elements got pushed to the end of the array. Now we also can use pop. Now pops an element off the end of the array, and you'll notice that number 11 disappeared. But it also returns that element. If we look again at the documentation, let's go back to pop. Pop removes the last element of an array and returns that element. So when it says returns that element, remember when we write a return statement in our functions, it's the same thing. We've got to somehow capture that. So if I put here, for example, var, we'll call it popped off for the value that's popped off. And then what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to write document, write, and let's get the value of popped off. Now, looking at the code here, can you tell what the value of popped off should be? Let's go through this again. We define our array. We use push to add two elements or two indexes to the array with the values 100 and 63. We then pop off the last element, and we store that in a variable called popped off because it returns it. And then we write popped off. So we should expect to see 63, and there's the value right there at the bottom, value 63. So that seems to have worked just fine. So there's, like I said, these methods are great to help you work with arrays, and they have a lot of utility to them. And every object has methods that make it easier to use the object. Let's take a look at one more. Let's say, let's do sort. So sort sorts the elements of the array. All right, so let's create a new array. So var names equals, and these will be strings, so they'll go in quotes, Phil, Bob, Tom, Oscar, Mary, and Jane. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document, actually let's do it this way, names dot sort, and again have the parentheses after it because it's a function. So now I'm going to sort the array with names.sort, and now that that's done, now I can output the array. I'll just use a normal loop this time. So for var y equals 0, y is less than names.length, y plus plus. You can do it either way. And now we're going to document write names, which is the array y, and we'll add a break to that. Make the output nice and neat. All right, so we get Bob, Jane, Mary, Oscar, Phil, and Tom. So the sort method successfully sorted our array alphabetically. So these methods are very, very useful when it comes to working with arrays and help us to manipulate the array in many helpful ways.